Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm Tori, and today we are going to talk about 10 female science fiction and fantasy authors that you should have on your TBR. Now, I have had the honor and privilege of reading some incredible books by female authors in the last couple of years, and I wanted to pull a little bit of a stack so I can show you guys some of those books, recommend them to you, and see if any of them would be a good fit for you to read in the future if you haven't already. There is something here for everyone, and there's an incredible array of wonderful storytelling in this stack of books. So let's start off with my January Cosmic Footsteps book club read that totally blew my mind. Now, it has been one of my goals for the entire year of 2024 to read a science fiction and fantasy book written by a female author from the pre-2000s once every month all the way through the year. And January, I was privileged enough to pick up Juliette Marillier's Daughter of the Forest. She does a beautiful job combining fantasy with historical elements and really bringing that kind of dark fairy tale aspect into her writing. Now you might think, oh, fairy tale, light and fluffy and romantic, right? Not necessarily. This book deals with some incredibly heavy themes, and while there is a romantic subplot in it, honestly, I never felt like that was something that overtook the main meat and potatoes of the story. She deals with themes like trauma and found family and all sorts of really amazing, deep themes in her stories, and she handles it with grace and reverence, and I was just so blown away by this book that I honestly immediately went out and picked up another 3 or 4 of her books because I can't wait to read more. In her own words, she recommends the Blackthorn and Grimm series as one of her best works, so if you're looking for a place to start, I would recommend Daughter of the Forest as a great place to start, but she also has said that Blackthorn and Grimm is her personal choice when it comes to her best work. Next up, I have to put an author on here that is no longer around to appreciate my call out of her work, but I think I would be remiss to put this stack together and not include this book. And that is a book that you guys know is one of my absolute favorite books of all time, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This book was written so long ago, and it still has so many incredibly powerful themes that speak to aspects of life today that I was just blown away reading this book. Frankenstein is the story of It's the story of a lot of things, but it is the story of Victor Frankenstein, who creates the monster. I mean, we all know the story, but do you actually? Because if you haven't read this book, then you don't know the story. Mary Shelley wrote this book when she was all of 16 years old as part of a sort of friendly competition between herself, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and Lord Byron, and there was one other person involved in this as well, and his name is escaping me at the moment. But she came up with Frankenstein. Their prompt was literally to write a scary story, essentially, during a thunderstorm, and we got Frankenstein out of the deal. Honestly, it is incredibly mind-blowing and profound to me that this 16-year-old girl had such a depth of understanding of the human spirit and the things that people struggle with in trying to find their identity and their place in the world. And this book, as you can see, is not very long, so if you've been putting it off because it's a classic, it's really not as scary as it sounds, and I can't recommend this book highly enough if you haven't read it already. Next up is another series that I had the privilege of reading last year, and that is the Green Bone Saga by Fonda Lee. This is an Asian-inspired, martial arts-infused gangster family epic. And this series really surprised me in so many ways, and one of the things that I think Fonda Lee does an incredible job of is creating actually morally gray characters. I feel like so often people say that they want morally gray characters in a story, and yet when we actually get them, most of the time people are like, well, I didn't like those decisions, and I didn't really like this character. And it's like, well, that's the point of a morally gray character. And in this book, Fonda Lee presents her characters in all of their flaws, in all of their strengths, and she just They are just who they are, and it is our job as the reader to make up our own opinions about them, and I think that she does that very, very well. This is a urban or modern fantasy, and the way that Fonda Lee infuses the magic system into this modern culture is really seamless and brilliant. I loved it. Fonda Lee is also someone who has a very strong grasp of business and economics in the world, and you can tell because this book, she knows everything. I'm pretty convinced she knows everything about what makes her world tick, and that makes for an incredibly lived-in world experience. Next up is an author from the indie fantasy scene, and that is Palmer Pickering, who is the author of Heliotrope. Now, this book is one that I'm going to recommend for those of you that love a good classic coming-of-age journey fantasy with a very powerful found family theme. The journey of these characters is really the focus of this story. There's so much world building and detail packed into this world that if you are a classic fantasy fan, this is going to be an excellent fit for you. The other thing I really liked about Heliotrope is that the magic system is very cool, and I think that Palmer did a great job infusing a lot of interesting details and building on that magic system as we go through the story. And beyond that, if you like a good set of animal companions, this is definitely going to be up your alley because there are some fantastic animal companions in this story, and it is very clear that Palmer knows her animals, which is something I always look for in fantasy, and I'm always really impressed when the authors get it right. Next up on this list is Janny Wirtz. Janny is a prolific fantasy author, and To Ride Hell's Chasm is one of her standalone fantasy novels that I had the privilege of reading back in January this year. And I was blown away. I have been told, and if you've heard Janny's name, you've probably heard people talk about her prose and how incredibly rich and complex her command of the English language is. And I am happy to report that that is absolutely true. This book will make you stop and think. It will make you just sit in awe of the way that Janny describes things. The beautiful part about Janny's writing is that while her book is very rich and complex in terms of prose, she never loses sight of the characters in that prose, and that was something as a character-focused reader I really appreciated. The balance of prose to character was impeccably done, and I was really impressed by that. To Ride Hell's Chasm is a very tense story of a young princess who's disappeared before her betrothal dinner, and our protagonist, Captain McHale, has to battle his own inner demons and also go to find the princess before it is too late. There is dark sorcery, there are backstabbings and betrayals, and the tension in this book just rises and rises to a fever pitch until we finally get to a climactic ending. Now, Janny is also the author of the almost finished, will be finishing here in 2024, Wars of Light and Shadow. That's one of the series you've probably heard moving around BookTube if you've been hearing Janny's name. And she just has so many different entry points to her work that I think no matter what kind of a story style you're looking for, you will find something of Janny's that's a good fit for you. Now, I'm pretty sure I would be getting a lot of messages if I didn't include this author on this list, and rightly so, because I have to bring up Robin Hobb, author of Realm of the Elderlings. Now, this is the story that spans many, many books that are all broken down into trilogies or quartets that build on the world up until the big ending with the final trilogy. Assassin's Apprentice is the first book of her Realm of the Elderlings magnum opus. Fitz is our protagonist in this particular opening trilogy, and he is a young man who is the bastard son of a noble family who is being raised by a stable master. And there's magic, there are incredibly slow burn relationship building in this story of all types. It's really well done emotional character storytelling. However, if Realm of the Elderlings feels like a little bit more than you want to bite off at this point, she actually also writes under the name Megan Lindholm and has other books in the fantasy genre that you can read as well. So there are, again, multiple entry points to Robin Hobb's work, but I would absolutely be remiss if I did not bring up Realm of the Elderlings, because Fitz and many of the other characters in this series are some of the most beloved in the fantasy genre across readers everywhere. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about an author that is fairly new to the fantasy scene compared to the others that I have mentioned, and that is K.E. Andrews. Now I'm going to give you two two different entry points to K.E. Andrews' work in the fantasy genre. The first one is Assassin of Grins and Secrets. This book is the story of Serene, an assassin who is dragged out of prison to basically help a prince uncover the horrible plots that are going on behind the scenes against his royal family. And Serene, as we go through the book, we uncover more and more of her backstory and the trauma that she has endured. This is definitely a very dark fantasy, but the story and the trio of main characters that we follow through this book is wonderful. If you're looking for an awesome trio of characters that isn't a love triangle, please check out this book because it is excellent assassin fantasy with a very dark edge. The other entry point to K.E. Andrews' fantasy work is Hills of Heather and Bone, which is a dark, mostly cozy, very wholesome story that is a romance between the main characters Morana and Percy, who are both magic users. Morana is a necromancer and Percy is basically has earth magic and healing magic. And the two of them are on the run from people who believe that Morana is a problem and a liability with her necromantic magic. Now, this story is incredibly wholesome. The animal companions are S tier. There's a spiteful chicken. I don't know what other reason you would need to read this book, but if you need another one, it is also a self-published fantasy blog off competition finalist this year, and it is a very quick read with some very wholesome, incredible relationship building with a mature couple that you don't often see in fantasy. And once again, just like with Assassin of Grins and Secrets, K.E. Andrews' ability to do beautiful prose and description shines through almost as much as her characters do. Next up is another new fantasy author that I am so excited to watch progress through their career, and that is Jacqueline Hagan, author of the Riverfall Chronicles. The first book, The Wickwire Watch, is also a finalist in the Spiffbo self-published fantasy blog off competition this year, and absolutely rightly so. This is a kind of gas lamp Victorian-esque era fantasy that follows the story of a young boy named Inkwell Featherfield, who's walking in the same kind of footsteps as characters like the Artful Dodger and Tom Sawyer. And he meets up with this group of people who he believes are very, very dangerous, but they're also the only people that can help him outrun the horrible otherworldly danger that chases him. There are 3 books so far in this series, and man, I cannot wait to see where this series goes and to see how Jacqueline continues to grow as a writer, because this is a heck of a debut series, you guys. And if you are looking for your next wholesome, gas lamp, tense fantasy, this is definitely it. Her magic system in this series is very, very cool, and it's based on emotions. There are a ton of really resonant themes in this book, and the characters, every time I open one of these books, it honestly just feels like going home, and I really appreciate when I can find a series like that. Next up is another author that I recently read, and honestly, I am kicking myself that it took me this long to read her work. And that is a book that I have had recommended to me for almost since I came back to BookTube in 2022. Everybody was telling me I needed to read this book, and they were not wrong. That is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. This is a Japanese-inspired fantasy story that follows the lives of 2 characters, Mamoru and Misaki, who are son and mother. And wow, if there is... M.L. Wong really said, how many incredibly deep, heart-wrenching themes can I pack into a single story? And she did it. Misaki's journey as a mother and someone who is trying to put away her life as a warrior to be a dutiful wife and mother, and her struggle with that, Mamoru's coming-of-age tale. I can't talk too much about the themes in this book without spoiling a lot of the events that happen about halfway through and forward, but when I tell you there were so many moments when this book really made me emotional, really resonated with me. It is a beautiful depiction of what it means to protect the people that you love, and to what ends will you go to do that. Also, themes of redemption and how to reach people who seem too far gone even for their own good. I know I keep saying themes with this book, but honestly, I was really impressed by this book, and I am definitely of the opinion that I should have read it a long time ago, but I had a fantastic time with it, and I highly, highly recommend Sword of Kaigen for anybody who has not picked it up yet. Last but not least is an author that I haven't even read yet, but I knew that I wanted to include her on this list because she deserves it, and I will be reading her work this year for the first time, and that is Andre Norton. Now, this is a woman who was literally referred to as the grand dame of science fiction and fantasy back in the 60s and 70s. She has written so many books, you guys. If you search her name and look at her list of books, an incredibly prolific author that really shaped, I think, a lot of the path forward for science fiction and fantasy writers moving into our current generation. And I am very excited to get into her work this year. She does write both science fiction and fantasy, so you can pick whichever one of those genres you want to start with. I just picked this one off my shelf. I have several of hers because I really like this cover. This one's called Forerunner. As you can see, it's very short. I would highly recommend for anyone interested to definitely check out this woman's canon of work and see if there's something in her repertoire that would work well for you. Now, on that note, if you want to follow along with the Cosmic Footsteps book club that I'm running this year, which again is where I am reading a female science fiction and fantasy written book from pre-2000s every month throughout the year of 2024, definitely keep an eye on my channel. I do have a playlist on my channel here that will include all of the Cosmic Footsteps book club content that I put out. And feel free to watch my community tab where I do post before every month which book we have chosen to read. If you want to join my Patreon, my patrons do get to vote on which book we will be reading for the next month out of the options that I give them. But yeah, I would love for you to participate in that on the channel and read along with us if that's something that you are interested in doing. That's all I got for you guys today. I hope that you are all having a wonderful week. I hope you are reading 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.